In the cold, dark stretches of the galaxy, where suns were few and shadows ruled, the Zorinth Dominion reigned without a single battle fought. They did not fire weapons or deploy fleets. They used something far more terrifying: fear. With psychic creatures known as dreadcasters, the Zorinth could reach into the minds of entire species and make them collapse in terror. Civilizations crumbled without resistance, surrendering worlds and wills before they even saw a single Zorinth in person. Stories of the Zorinth spread like ghost tales, planets falling silent overnight, leaders found weeping in corners, people vanishing into madness. The Galactic Council, a gathering of over 60 different species, had watched helplessly as the Dominion crept closer, one world at a time. Now, the Council itself was starting to feel the touch of that invisible hand. It was at this moment, in a desperate final plea, they turned to Earth, a planet known more for its wild history and unpredictable people than its military might. The humans had only recently joined the interstellar stage. Other species saw them as reckless, impulsive, stubborn, and oddly hopeful even in dark times. No one expected much from them, not really. Still, with nothing left to lose, the Council summoned them. Earth responded. From a massive human vessel, a sleek ship black, as night stepped Colonel Imani Reyes, a tall, scarred woman with sharp eyes and a calm face. She wore no armor, just a simple uniform and a long coat fluttering behind her. Her reputation came before her, veteran of the Martian rebellions, the AI conflicts, and the Europa sinkhole crisis. Some said she once walked through a burning ship just to rescue a child. Others said she'd never lost a battle. As she entered the great hall of the Council, silence fell. Leaders of trembling worlds watched her, hoping for some sign that humanity could do what no one else had done. From across the chamber, a shimmering fog rolled in, cool, silver, and unnatural. The Zorinth emissary had arrived. Its body shifted, like smoke held in a glass cage, eyes glowing with cold intelligence. Without a word, it extended its will, probing minds, seeking weaknesses. The room stiffened. Council members winced, some clutching their heads. But Reyes? She stood still, calm. Her heartbeat didn't spike, her eyes didn't flicker. The Zorinth tried again, digging deeper, casting illusions of fire, drowning, isolation, loss. It found memories in her, bloody battles, fallen comrades, mistakes. But instead of fear, it found something else: resolve. She had already lived through her nightmares, and survived. Reyes met the glowing eyes of the Zorinth and smiled, a quiet, unbothered smile that cut through the room like a blade. The Zorinth flinched. For the first time, the being made of fear felt something it had never known before: uncertainty. Reyes stepped forward, her voice low but steady. "You claim to know fear. We've lived it. We've turned it into steel." Then she turned to the Council. "We'll go to their test world, let them throw their worst at us, and when we walk out, they'll know what true fear is." The Council gasped. Even the bravest leaders hadn't dared visit the Zorinth simulation world, Varnick, a planet designed to crush spirits and fracture minds. But Reyes wasn't bluffing. Her team had already trained for it. Humanity had faced extinction, civil, war, plague, and worse, and each time had crawled back up bloody and laughing. As Reyes left the chamber, the Zorinth emissary vanished like smoke. Its form rattled. Across the Dominion, silent alarms triggered. The humans had entered the game. The galaxy held its breath. The planet Varnick was quiet when Colonel Imani Reyes and her team arrived, but it was the kind of quiet that felt wrong. Like the air was holding its breath, like the world itself was watching. The human team, made up of 5 hardened soldiers and 1 psychologist, stepped off their transport in silence. The sky above was a deep red, not from sunset, but from some unnatural glow that seemed to come from nowhere. The ground cracked under, their boots soft and dusty, as if it hadn't known peace in centuries. Around them were hills shaped like faces frozen in screams, trees with twisted trunks like reaching fingers, and a wind that carried faint whispers too soft to understand, but too loud to ignore. This was the Zorinth's domain, a place designed not to kill but to break the mind. It had crushed hundreds of alien teams before them. No one had ever walked out whole. Some never walked out at all. Yet the humans didn't hesitate. Reyes motioned for camp to be set up. Her soldiers moved fast and calm, setting down portable barriers, assembling shelters, lighting small heaters. When the first night fell, it fell like a curtain, sudden, cold and endless. The stars vanished. The sky turned into a swirling black void. And then the attacks began, not with claws or weapons, but with nightmares. Private Quan, the youngest of the team, saw his mother walking through the dark, calling his name. She was crying, her body covered in burns he remembered from the Mars explosion. He dropped his rifle and stumbled forward, but Reyes was there in seconds, grabbing his shoulder and speaking firmly. "She's not real. Look at me. Breathe." Her voice cut through the illusion like a knife. The nightmare flickered and vanished. Quan nodded slowly, picking up his weapon with shaking hands. Elsewhere in the camp, another soldier, Ramirez, found herself back in the Europa cave-in, buried alive, air running out. Her screams woke the team, but again Reyes grounded her with calm words and a steady gaze. She had trained them for this, not just in strength but in mind. They were not here to fight the Zorinth's monsters. They were here to show they couldn't be broken. On the second night, the planet changed. The hills moved. The faces in the ground began to whisper. The wind carried the voices of loved ones, begging for help. The trees bled a thick black sap that sizzled when it touched the ground. The soldiers stayed inside their small shelters, but Reyes remained outside, standing still for hours, eyes watching the horizon. She spoke little, but when she did, it was always calm and clear. "They want us to panic, so we won't." In orbit, the Zorinth watched. Their dreadcasters pulsed with power, confused by the human resistance. The fear levels should have been rising. Instead, the humans showed boredom, annoyance, even laughter. On the third day, Reyes ordered a fire pit built. The soldiers gathered, roasted synthetic marshmallows and shared stories. One told of facing a rogue AI in the tunnels of Lunar Base. Another told of fighting pirates on Titan. They laughed, even as shadows circled their camp, and the sky screamed. One of the Zorinth horrors, a tall, many-limbed beast from the fear memories of a long-extinct race, approached the firelight. It hissed, its body twitching, expecting screams. Instead, Reyes stood up, walked forward, and met it face to face. She stared into its hollow eyes for a long moment, then raised her hand and said, "Boo!" The creature recoiled, confused, and vanished into smoke. The soldiers laughed again, harder this time. That night, one of the dreadcasters short-circuited from psychic feedback. It had tried to mirror Reyes's mind and couldn't handle the flood of war, pain, and defiance. The Zorinth High Command met in private, disturbed. They had seen terror in every species they conquered, but these humans didn't collapse. They adapted, they mocked, they pushed back. On the fourth day, Reyes found one of the planet's nightmare beasts dead near the camp. Its throat was crushed. No blaster marks, no knife wounds, just raw force. She called her team together and said simply, "We're not guests anymore. They know we're dangerous." That evening, she left a message in the control chamber hidden under the surface, a room the Zorinth had built to monitor and record the fear patterns. The words were written on the wall in the creature's blood, "Try harder." The message went viral across the Dominion. Some Zorinth called it impossible, others called it a lie. But Reyes didn't care. She had come to make a point, and she wasn't finished. As the final night approached, the simulations reached their peak. The land cracked open, revealing oceans of fire. The air was filled with screaming winds. The sky rained shadows that clawed at the shelters. Illusions reached into their minds, dragging out their worst memories and making them walk through them again and again. Reyes never wavered. She walked through a burning field where her old squad had died, through a ruined city where children cried for help, through her own death, slow, painful, alone. But every time she came out the other side stronger. When she returned to camp, at dawn her team was still there, huddled together but alive, watching the horizon. She nodded. "We hold." And they did. At sunrise, the Zorinth pulled them from the simulation, defeated. The test was over. No team had lasted this long, and none had remained this untouched. The Council, watching from orbit, was silent at first. Then the cheering began. Reyes didn't smile, but her eyes were sharp. She looked up toward the stars and spoke to no one in particular. "They think fear is power. We'll teach them otherwise." The Dominion had underestimated humanity. Now they had a problem they couldn't scare away. The ship that brought Colonel Imani Reyes and her team back from Varnick was silent inside, not from fear, but from thought. Each soldier sat quietly, eyes focused, hands steady, hearts still racing. From the nightmare world they had conquered without firing a single shot, and though they had faced horrors meant to break minds, not one of them had fallen. The galaxy whispered now of a new force, humans, the fearless breed, and every corner of the Zorinth Dominion shivered with the unease of something they had never encountered before, resistance that could not be bent. Reyes stood at the front of the ship, arms crossed, staring at the stars ahead as if daring them to blink. Her mind was already moving forward, deeper into the storm, because fear was not just an emotion to her, it was a weapon, one the Zorinth had built their empire upon, and if you could understand a weapon, you could take it apart. She had a plan, and it began not with attack, but with infiltration. Hidden among the Zorinth worlds were massive black towers known as dreadcaster hubs, machines that generated the psychic force behind their empire's terror, pulsing, humming, centers of mental pressure designed to keep every world under Dominion control trembling. No one had ever gotten near one. Most species didn't even know where they were. But Reyes had noticed a pattern during her mission. Subtle shifts in energy, repeated code pulses through the simulated nightmare terrain. She passed the data to a quiet young analyst named Gray, who stayed up for 3 days straight before he stood pale and stunned and said, "I think I found one." It was located deep in the Goral Expanse, a dead zone of twisted gravity and decaying moons, where no sane traveler dared to go. That alone told Reyes it was real. They left at once, using a stealth cruiser the Council didn't even know humanity had finished building, called the Vigilant Ash. It was small, fast and quiet, everything they needed. As they moved closer to the coordinates, the ship's lights began to flicker, and strange whispers filled the corridors at night. Reyes didn't flinch. She ordered everyone to sleep in shifts, stay calm and ignore the illusions. The dreadcaster hub was already reaching out, sensing their minds, trying to stop them before they arrived. But the humans had walked through worse. Finally, the structure came into view, dark as a void, floating above a shattered moon, wrapped in coils of strange energy that shimmered like oil. Reyes led her team down in full silence. No words were needed. Each soldier knew what was at stake. Inside the hub, the walls pulsed like living skin, cold and smooth, and their comms began to distort. Each step brought a stronger pressure in their heads, but Reyes moved forward like she couldn't feel it, like fear had long since been burned out of her. In the center of the hub was the core, a floating sphere of crystal surrounded by psychic coils. It was alive, an artificial intelligence built to read and amplify fear from every connected world. It scanned them the moment they entered. The others flinched. Quan fell to one knee, his mind flashing with images of his own death. Ramirez screamed but kept her weapon raised. Reyes walked straight to the core. The AI reached into her, searching, scanning, and then it froze. What it found in Reyes was not emptiness, but something far worse for it. Memories full of pain, yes, but also of rising through it, pushing past it, using it. She had lost friends, bled in battle, failed in command, buried guilt deep in her heart, but she was still standing, stronger than before. The AI began to stutter, the coils flashing red, its programming unable to process what it saw as illogical resilience. Reyes stepped closer. "You wanted to understand fear," she whispered, placing her hand on the core, "but you never understood survival." With a scream like grinding metal, the dreadcaster began to overload. Reyes motioned her team back, and they ran as the chamber cracked, flames erupting from the walls. The psychic energy exploded upward in a brilliant arc of light, visible from orbit. Across the Dominion, the network faltered. Fear signals cut. Planets stirred from their controlled slumber. Old memories returned to people who had lived under fear their whole lives. Some rebelled instantly. Some just began to wonder for the first time if the Zorinth were really gods. The core was gone. Reyes was alive. And now the galaxy knew it was possible. As the team escaped back to the ship, bruised but breathing, a message pinged on the console. It was a private channel, encrypted, marked with a Zorinth seal. Reyes opened it and a soft voice spoke in broken English. "My name is Nisira. I am Zorinth, but not like them. I have watched you. I want to help." Reyes stared at the screen. A Zorinth defector, unthinkable. But her voice held no deception, only fear, real fear, the kind the Dominion had never acknowledged. Reyes responded simply, "Then let's talk." The war had just changed. The fearless breed had struck, and now even the architects of terror were starting to run. The message from Nisira changed everything, not just because she was Zorinth, but because she claimed to be born inside one of the Dominion's fear labs, engineered to craft illusions, raised in shadows, trained to manipulate minds, and yet she spoke with something rare among her kind: hesitation, even guilt. She had seen what the dreadcasters did to worlds, how they broke people without touching them, and after watching Reyes and her team survive Varnick and destroy a core, something cracked inside her. She no longer saw fear as control, but as a chain she wanted to break, and now she offered Reyes more than just information. She offered a way to reverse the dreadcaster effect itself. Reyes listened closely, her expression hard as ever, but her eyes alert, weighing every word, testing for lies. But the Zorinth's voice didn't waver, even when she spoke of secrets hidden deep in the Dominion's home system, on a world called Istrix, where the first dreadcaster was built, where all others were copied from, and where the original design still pulsed like a heart of darkness. If they could reach it, Nisira said, they could do more than destroy it. They could mirror its effect, turning fear into calm, panic into resistance, a psychic weapon that could set the entire galaxy free. It was a plan so bold, it sounded like madness, but Reyes knew history favored the reckless. So within hours, the vigilant Ash was charting a course no human ship had dared take. The journey was brutal. The space near Istrix twisted, full of strange gravity waves and psychic echoes of ruined minds. And more than once, crew members woke from nightmares that didn't feel like dreams, but borrowed memories from people long dead. Reyes kept them focused, standing at the helm like a stone pillar, issuing orders with quiet certainty. Her strength became their anchor. As they neared the planet, Istrix appeared not as a shining world, but as a dull orb of rust and mist shrouded. in ancient machines and towers that reached into space like claws. The team descended in silence, knowing they wouldn't be able to call for help, knowing that if they failed, no one would know what happened to them. Nicira met them in secret, wearing a disguise that flickered when the wind hit her, a tall, graceful figure with glowing eyes dimmed to pale blue. She walked like a shadow, but her voice was steady, and she guided them through the ruins of her people's oldest city, through corridors carved into black stone, past ancient murals that showed Zorinth history, planets falling, species surrendering, the dreadcasters growing in power. But one wall showed something different, a single Zorinth kneeling beside a broken machine, hands pressed over its eyes, as if ashamed. "That was the first engineer," Nicira whispered. "He died before they perfected the fear loop. I think he knew what he had created." Reyes said nothing, but her jaw clenched slightly. The closer they got to the core chamber, the thicker the air became. Heavy, not with heat, but with emotion. Layers of psychic pressure built over centuries. Ramirez dropped to one knee, gasping, and even Reyes stumbled for a breath before Nicira led them into a shielded passage where the air cleared. There it was, the original dreadcaster core, hovering in the center of a massive chamber, pulsing with dark light, connected to spires that reached deep into the planet. Nicira showed them the interface, ancient and alive, and explained that with a reverse pulse amplified through the spires, they could unleash a wave of emotional clarity across all linked worlds, breaking the fear chain for good. But it would only work once, and the system would collapse afterward. Reyes agreed instantly. "Then we do it," she said, and the team got to work, hacking through ancient codes, bypassing systems that screamed with pain, defending themselves from mental attacks that came like whispers in their ears. At one point, Quan froze, trapped in a vision of his family dying in fire, but Nicira reached into his mind and pulled him back, her glowing hand pressed to his temple. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "We were never supposed to become this." The system was nearly ready when alarms blared throughout the facility. Zorinth guards had discovered them. Black-armored creatures with blades of light surged into the chamber, and for the first time, Reyes raised her weapon. "No more running," she said, and the room lit up with blasts and fire. The team fought with precision, covering each other, holding the line as Nicira finished the pulse sequence. The moment the last line of code locked in, Reyes shouted, "Now!" and Nicira slammed her hand on the control. The core screamed, not with sound, but with feeling. A psychic wave exploded, outward, flooding the tower, the city, the planet, and then the sky itself. Across the Dominion, worlds paused. Minds that had lived in fear for generations suddenly felt calm, clear. The nightmares stopped. People remembered who they were. Armies dropped their weapons. Resistance leaders found courage they hadn't felt in years. Even the dreadcasters began to short out, overwhelmed not by fear, but by something stronger, hope. But the cost came fast. The spires cracked, the ground shook, and the chamber began to collapse. Reyes ordered the retreat, and they ran, dodging falling debris and leaping over broken floors. Nicira helped Ramirez through a shattered archway, then turned back to look at the core one last time. It was dying, but so was the fear it had spread. They reached the surface just as the tower behind them caved inward, sending a shockwave that echoed into orbit. The vigilant ash picked them up seconds later, and as it rose into space, Reyes looked back at the planet of fear, now silent and still. "It's done," she said quietly. Across the stars, species once broken by terror now rose, their chains shattered. And somewhere deep in the Zorinth homeworld, surviving leaders stared at the empty space where their power used to be, and felt for the first time something they had never truly known: fear. Real fear, the kind that comes when you realize your enemy doesn't run. They walk toward you, The day began like any other across the Dominion, with the usual silence of obedience, the dull hum of control towers, and the heavy, invisible grip of the dreadcasters holding minds in fear. But something was wrong, and the Zorinth knew it even before the alarms began. Their monitoring stations showed strange patterns. People gathering in streets without permission, children laughing instead of shrinking, soldiers hesitating before obeying commands, and then entire cities simply stopping, as if waking from a deep dream, blinking into the light for the first time in generations. On planet after planet, the fear signal had vanished, and the citizens, no longer bound by invisible chains, began to speak, to rise, to fight back. The fear pulse that once linked over 100 worlds had collapsed, and now, in its absence, something powerful was spreading, something raw, something alive, freedom. Colonel Imani Reyes stood aboard the Vigilant Ash in orbit above Istrix, eyes fixed on the swirling clouds below, where the original dreadcaster had been destroyed only. Hours ago, her team was silent, watching the data streams pouring in, showing signs of rebellion, of resistance, of awakening across the entire Zorinth Dominion. Reyes didn't smile, but her hand curled into a fist at her side. They built their empire on fear, she said quietly, and now fear is gone. But the war wasn't over. As the news of the psychic collapse spread, the High Zorinth Council issued a final order, Operation Dreadfire, a desperate plan to restore control by releasing physical terror instead of mental. Across key planets, they activated sleeper units, triggered chemical fear bombs, and unleashed creatures bred in the darkest labs of the Dominion. It was the last breath of a dying power, violent and sudden. On Istrix 4, great black ships descended from the sky, dropping fear beasts with 6 legs and howling mouths. On Arrak's moon, towers exploded in clouds of red gas that caused hallucinations and panic. But something had changed in the people. Instead of crumbling, they fought. Instead of running, they stood. Old soldiers who had once served the Dominion now turned their weapons against it. Civilians linked arms to form human walls, shielding the weak. And in the skies above, the Vigilant Ash moved like a ghost, striking down enemy ships with perfect precision, its human crew guiding rebel fleets with calm commands. Reyes led her team down to the surface of Istrix 4, landing in the middle of a burning city where a massive Zorinth beast had torn through a district. The creature was 12 feet tall, with bone armor and eyes that glowed with a hungry light, created in a lab to induce terror by scent alone. But when it roared at Reyes, she didn't move. She stepped forward, her boots crunching over broken glass, her voice cold as steel. "You're not fear. Your noise." Then she fired a single shot right through the beast's eye, and it fell with a crash that shook the ground. The rebels cheered, and for the first time they saw something even stronger than courage. They saw a leader who didn't just defy fear, but destroyed it. On a nearby ridge, a Zorinth general watched in disbelief, his claws twitching. This wasn't how the humans were supposed to react. Fear was supposed to be in their blood. He tried to issue a retreat command, but his own troops hesitated, unsure for the first time if their orders were worth following. That hesitation spread like a virus, and by nightfall, the general's forces had collapsed from within. Reyes and her team continued moving from world to world, helping lead strikes on remaining fear centers, coordinating rebel groups, and spreading the truth. The Dominion was vulnerable, and its strongest weapon had failed. On Torvax Prime, a broadcast tower was taken, and a message was sent out in hundreds of languages. Fear is not strength. Strength is standing when fear says fall. We are human. We are free. Those words echoed across the stars, not just as sound, but as memory. They reminded people of their parents, their ancestors, their lost homes, and something deep inside them stirred. Whole cities began flying the same banner, a white handprint on black cloth. a symbol of the fearless breed. The Zorinth Council, in panic, recalled every surviving commander, pulling them back to their homeworld Istrix to prepare for a final stand. They hoped to rebuild the fear system, to reforge the weapon they had lost, but they were too late. Nicira, the Zorinth defector who had helped Reyes, returned with stolen data, enough to crash the Dominion's fleet communication grid. With her help, human engineers triggered a cascade failure across Zorinth battle networks. Their ships became blind, their soldiers deaf, their command lines fractured. Still, Reyes knew the final blow had to come not from shadows, but from light. She ordered a full-scale strike on Istrix. A joint fleet of rebel ships smuggled human. Cruisers and defected Zorinth vessels approached the system not hidden, but proud. Reyes stood at the bridge of the lead vessel, the vigilant Ash, watching the planet grow larger in the viewport. Her voice rang out over the fleet channel, steady and calm. Today we end it, not with fear, with fire, with truth, with choice. The fleet descended, not into a trap, but into history. The Zorinth defenses crumbled within hours, their own people rising up from inside, tearing down towers that had stood for centuries. Reyes and her team landed near the Council's tower, a massive spire built to radiate fear to every corner of the galaxy, and walked through its shattered gates. No illusions waited, no whispers, only silence and the soft wind of a dying empire. The high Zorinth leaders stood in the chamber, waiting, tall and proud and desperate. One stepped forward, cloaked in silver, eyes flickering. "You could rule," he said. "You could take our place." Reyes stepped closer, eye to eye with the creature who once commanded worlds. "We didn't come to rule," she said. "We came to remind you what it means to fall." Then she raised her weapon, and with one pulse ended the last echo of fear in that place. Later, as the people of 100 freed worlds gathered to speak, to rebuild, to dream, Reyes stood at the edge of a quiet hill on Istrix, looking at a sky no longer filled with shadows. Nicira stood beside her, quiet, unsure. "They will remember this day," Nicira said. "They will remember when fear died." Reyes nodded, her voice soft. "Then we make sure it never comes back." And so, with the last dreadcaster gone and the Dominion broken, the galaxy turned a page. Not with celebration, but with resolve. Fear had ruled for too long. Now humanity had shown another way, and the stars were ready to listen. The stars were quiet after the fall of the Dominion, but peace never stayed quiet for long, and deep in the ruins of Istrix, beneath the broken towers and burned-out fear labs, something old stirred, something that had watched even the Zorinth with cold interest, something not born of flesh or mind, but forged in the dark between galaxies long before the Dominion began. While the people of the liberated world celebrated and rebuilt, Reyes remained uneasy, her instincts sharp as ever, because she knew empires never truly die, they only bury their roots deeper. And one strange signal from Istrix confirmed her fear. It wasn't a message, it was a pattern, a low-frequency pulse hidden in the remains of the first dreadcaster core, a whisper too exact to be random, repeating one word in a forgotten machine language. Awaken. Reyes, Nicira, and the crew of the vigilant Ash returned to Istrix with a small task force, moving through the broken city like ghosts. And what they found beneath the surface was worse than anything they had faced before. A hidden vault, sealed in alloys no modern scanner could see, filled with ancient machines still humming with energy, and at the center, suspended in a cage of light, was what Nicira called the First Thought, the original mind code from which the dreadcasters were made, not Zorinth, not human, but something else entirely. Something that designed fear as a tool, not to control this galaxy, but to test it. The architects of dread, long believed to be myth, were real, and this code was their echo. Reyes watched the sphere flicker in patterns that twisted even her trained mind, and Nisira warned that touching it could trigger a recall, summoning the others, those who had left their creations behind to grow and learn. But Reyes was never one to run from the unknown. She ordered a secure interface, and Quan, now hardened by war and sharpened by purpose, began decoding the patterns. As the hours passed, the sphere responded, not like a machine, but like a mind. Waking up, asking questions, testing logic, playing with emotion, and slowly it learned them, just as they were trying to learn it. Then came the message. You have survived your fear. Now we measure your strength. The vault trembled, and the sphere shattered into light, sending out a signal not to a place, but to a direction, beyond the edge of the known stars. Something was coming. Reyes realized this wasn't the end of the story, it was a trial, and the Dominion had only been the first phase. If the architects were returning, then humanity had only won the first game. The team barely escaped as the vault collapsed, sealing itself with a final energy lock, but the message had already spread. Across the former Dominion, strange anomalies appeared, structures awakening, machines buried in old ruins activating, sleeper probes launching into deep space. Each carried the same symbol, an eye inside a spiral, the mark of the architects. Reyes called an emergency summit of all free worlds, where leaders of species once scattered now gathered in unity. She stood before them not as a conqueror, but as a warning. The Dominion fell because we fought together, she said. Now something greater watches us. We don't need fear to survive. We need each other. As the crowd murmured, distant sensors picked up a fleet approaching from the deep void. Not like the Zorinth ships. These were angular, silent, and wrapped in fields of data that bent space around them. The architects had sent observers, machines built not to destroy, but to study. When the first one reached the edge of the Istrix system, it did nothing, just watched, scanning every ship, every broadcast, every heartbeat. It spoke only once, in a voice that echoed across all frequencies. Stage 2 begins. Badu, then it vanished. Across the free systems, people braced for invasion, but none came. Instead, strange effects began. Machines malfunctioning in impossible ways, people seeing memories that weren't theirs, gravity shifting slightly in deep space corridors. The architects weren't attacking. They were unraveling reality piece by piece, testing limits. Reyes knew fear wouldn't stop them, and neither would force. So she gathered the best minds, human and Zorinth, rebel and former enemy, into a team called the Codex, tasked with understanding the patterns. With Nisira at her side, now fully trusted, and Ramirez leading defensive command, Reyes formed a plan not to destroy, but to challenge the architects' rules. They built a ship unlike any before, called the Answer, equipped with logic weaved. Through emotion, coded thoughts turned into living circuits and a core that used human empathy as power. When launched into the anomaly storm left by the observers, it didn't break, it sang, and the response was immediate. One of the observers returned, this time not to watch, but to speak. You altered the code, it said. Why? Reyes stepped forward, face unshaken. Because we are not your test. We are the result. For a moment the stars flickered, and then the observer simply folded into itself and disappeared. All across the known galaxy the anomalies stopped. The probes shut down. The last fear core flickered once, then died. And in the silent dark beyond, the architects did not return. Some say they accepted humanity's answer, others say they paused to think. But for Reyes and her people, the victory was not just survival, it was evolution. The architects had built a cage of fear, and humanity had broken it not with weapons, but with will. The architects were not gods, they were creators, But their greatest creation, the one thing they did not expect, was a species that learned to walk through fear and keep walking. On the day Rhea stepped down from command, years later, she visited the old site on Istrix, where the vault had collapsed. The ground was silent, but beneath it, she knew the echo still waited, not to rise again, but to remember. Humanity had been tested, and in the end, it was not fear that shaped them. It was the choice to face it. The architects were unmade not by fire, but by a single truth. Fear is a weapon, but hope is a shield no hand can break.